Welcome to the Protecting Your Retirement Radio Show, right here on Talk Radio 640 WGST. Are you frustrated with the ups and downs of the stock market? Not sure how to invest your hard-earned retirement money? Each week, we'll look at the money-saving tips you need to know to have a successful retirement. Now, from the heart of Buckhead, here's your host, wealth coach, and financial advisor, David Nicholas.
All right. Hello, everybody. We appreciate you tuning in for another episode here of Protecting Your Retirement. I'm your host, David Nicholas. You can catch us here every Saturday at 3 p.m. We're on from 3 to 4 right here on 640 WAM, WGST in good old Atlanta, Georgia. Well, we said we got a great show in store for you guys today. We had a lot of calls from last week, so we're hoping to keep the momentum going this week. If you have questions, you can always shoot us an email at info@nicholaswealth.com. That's info@nicholaswealth.com. Our telephone number at the office, 404-890-5606. Just financial show, it's an investment show. From time to time, we talk about politics. We talk about the issues that affect you as Georgians, as Americans, as investors. So with us today, we actually got a very special guest. I'm excited to have him with us. We actually have Sam Olens with us. He is the Attorney General here of this great state of Georgia. Just a couple of his achievements. He has quite a few, but he joined forces with legislators to advocate for stronger human trafficking rights here in Georgia, which many folks may not realize that this Georgia, Atlanta specifically, is one of the largest areas for human trafficking in the country. He also worked alongside legislators to pass a rewrite of Georgia's open meetings and open records laws, which brought more transparency here to state government in Georgia. He also delivered a primetime address in 2012 on national health care reform and federal regulatory overreach. And he is also, in January of 2013, he was named Georgia Trend Magazine's most influential Georgians on Georgia's Power Lift. So, Mr. Olens, we appreciate you being with us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great. Well, I just want to start out, obviously, being a financial show, talking a little bit about Dodd-Frank. So I think you joined quite a few other states in a fight against Dodd-Frank. And just for our listeners, Dodd-Frank is one of the broadest financial reforms that we've seen since the 1930s, but it covers everything from financial institutions to business practices to insurance companies, banks, credit card industries, but it also gives the Treasury Secretary the ability to liquidate financial companies with very little notice. So just want to talk on that and just see what efforts you had done here in the state of Georgia when it comes to Dodd-Frank.
Sure. So there's a community bank in the state of Texas and 11 states that are in that lawsuit. It currently is pending in the D.C. Circuit Court or the Federal Appellate Court in D.C. Dodd-Frank is to the financial industry what the Affordable Care Act is to the healthcare industry. And what you talked about right before was the Orderly Liquidation Authority. That gives the Secretary of Treasury the ability to give a company 24 hours notice before the government takes it over. It totally avoids bankruptcy law. It totally avoids that section of our Constitution that requires that bankruptcy be uniform. You give notice to the company has 24 hours to then have a federal judge stop them. If that isn't amazing enough, the hearing is not public. The paperwork is not public. It is totally kept from the American public. I can't think of another example where something is so quickly handled without any view by the American public. And at the end of the 24-hour period, the Secretary of Treasury takes over the company, and then he or she decides what the shareholders, the pension accounts, get or don't get from the assets of that company.
Wow. Is this a backdoor way, in a sense, the government picking kind of winners and losers here, kind of as it pleases?
Well, it goes back to that theory, too big to fail,
Sure.
which I've never quite understood, because if we're a free market system, as you said, the government is not supposed to be choosing the winners and losers. And it's interesting, the Secretary of Treasury is to use 7 factors in determining whether a company can fail. But the way Congress passed the bill, the majority of those factors cannot be viewed by the company in federal court to stop the takeover. So it is a grossly undemocratic bill that, from our perspective, is overtly unconstitutional.
Well, let me ask you this: is it just limited to financial companies, or if there's another company that, let's just say, they get together in their private room and decide that it is too big to fail, is that company at the whims of the government take over as well?
No, it relates to companies that are financial, but one might be surprised with what types of companies would be viewed as financial. So we're not just limiting it to banks or securities companies. It's a much broader definition than that.
Gotcha. So does that affect, for example, smaller community banks here in the state of Georgia? Could that affect the smaller banks here around town?
In theory, it could, but in practice, they're going after the big guys if they were to do this rather than a regular community bank, where the community banks are taking the big hit is simply from the massive regulations that come from various state and federal agencies that have no effort to rationalize their regs to work with one another. So what really affects the community banks so adversely is when you have 4 different regulators and they want different things at different times, and at times tell those community banks to take different actions that are inconsistent with each other.
Folks, we are listening to Protecting Your Retirement here on 640 WGST. We're talking to Sam Olens, the Attorney General here of Georgia. We were just talking about the Dodd-Frank legislation that was passed a few years back and what the Attorney General is doing to make sure that it doesn't affect Georgians in a negative way. Well, sir, when it comes to being the Attorney General, your job is to enforce the laws that are on the books. Now, I want to look at it again on a federal level. It seems to me that we have an administration that it seems to ignore, if not at least not defend, some of the laws that it seems that it decides shouldn't be defended. As you know, we've got the undocumented immigrants. The administration came out and said they weren't going to deport them under a certain age. We've got the administration came out and said they weren't going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act in courts. There's other acts and laws. They just said, you know, we're just going to bypass that and not enforce that. So the question, are we seeing a disturbing pattern of almost an expansion of executive power under President Obama, a kind of a super legislator, you could call it? Are we seeing that unfold?
Actually, what we're seeing is a super veto. I agree with you 100%. What we've got is an administration that is choosing to not follow laws it does not like, which I think is very, very dangerous, because when you look at the Constitution, we've got the 3 branches of government. I often am asked to defend a Georgia law that I may not personally support, but that does not give me the authority to not defend it or to seek to enforce that law. It is the role of the courts or the judiciary to choose when laws are unconstitutional. It is not at the whim of either a state attorney general or the United States attorney general. I would suggest that when the United States attorney general or any state attorney general seeks to defy the law, you in essence are creating anarchy. You in essence are creating disrespect of the law. We are a country based on the rule of law. And it is for the executive branch to execute the laws and enforce the laws. It is for the judicial branch to take the actions that we're seeing this administration take. Now, the problem area is, what do you do about it?
Right.
So many folks are wondering, why are not actors filing suits against the administration for their actions? And the answer is, you've got to have standing. We have a system where we don't want people to automatically go to the courts when they don't have what's called standing or a material injury from the act. So, for instance, when you talk about all the numerous delays with the Affordable Care Act, the party that has standing the most would be the insurance companies. But they're not apt to file the suit because they're at the trough. They're receiving the administration's dollars to run the program.
Interesting.
So Joe Blow consumer doesn't have standing because they're not artificially hurt by the bill. The state attorney general doesn't have standing. I mean, we have insurance through the state. So the party that's sustaining the injury is the federal government, who just keeps offering, it's the insurance companies, so the federal government keeps offering more money to do their job.
Isn't that interesting? Well, it seems to me almost that there's a precedent being set. Let's just fast forward 2 years from now. We have a Republican president. You called it, and I'll phrase you as almost a super veto, but couldn't the precedent be set where a president could tell state attorney generals, well, look, there's this Affordable Health Care Act. If you don't feel that it's constitutional, then you don't have to enforce it. Isn't it? Aren't we almost talking about the same thing there, just on the flip side?
And it would be just as wrong. Let me give you another scenario. Let's assume that the Republican Party takes the Senate, and let's assume that the House and Senate pass a law. The president chooses not to sign it. He also doesn't veto it. By not vetoing it, it becomes the law of the land. But he or she then chooses to not enforce it because they don't like it. That would be just as inappropriate, just as illegal. So the actions of the executive branch in this regard are very, very dangerous to American jurisprudence and only create a perception among the American people that the law doesn't count.
It's incredible to see what's happened here over the last couple of years. So just as we close up, we've got about a minute or so. When it comes to Obamacare here in the state of Georgia, I know there's many that are against it. I'm sure there's some that it has benefited. But as far as turning the law over or repealing the law, as far as that goes, really the only way that law will ever get repealed is if there's a change through Congress, correct?
Right. I mean, you can have wins in court that make it tougher for the administration to finance the bill, but this president seems to find many pots of federal dollars and redirect it. So you've got all the religious liberty lawsuits, you've got lawsuits on the origination clause, you have lawsuits with regard to the employer mandate, and we're active in many of those spaces. But the long and short of it is the only way to actually have a redo and to give the American public real health care reform is with new legislation.
Absolutely. Well, Mr. Olens, we appreciate your time. If Georgians want to find out a little bit more about what you guys are doing at the Attorney General's office, is there somewhere that they can go, a website possibly to follow up on?
Absolutely. It's law.gov, G-O-V. There's also a place on the website where you can contact me, and if you do contact the Attorney General, those emails do go directly to me. And I'd encourage everyone to, in fact, sign up on our website, the state website, and find out what we're doing.
That's great. Well, sir, we were talking to Sam Olens, who's the Attorney General here of Georgia. If you want to find out more about what they're doing, you can go to law.ga.gov. Sir, we appreciate all your hard work that you've done on behalf of Georgians. We appreciate your time today, and best of luck in all you guys are doing. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Have a great day.
All right, folks, you're listening to Protecting Your Retirement with me, David Nicholas. Don't go anywhere. After the break, we're going to be talking about the markets, what you can expect going forward over the summer months, and what you can do now to make sure your investments are lined properly. I'm David Nicholas right here on 640 AM WGST. We'll see you after the break.